Hi, welcome to the tailoring of the month. I'm going to do these monthly. I'm going to show you how to do a pretty general type of tailoring to a Wisys application that we often see requested by customers. So this month, we're going to start out with rearranging a form for the handheld device, and we're going to do that in Agility Form Studio. So we're going to take the out-of-the-box sales order picking form, which looks like this, and we're going to just take the item field and move it to the top so that the picker in the warehouse can start from the item down. They can identify, okay, maybe I'm here standing near this item, so I'm going to start with that item. I'm going to pick it, see what pick lists go with that item, what orders, and what have you. So, of course, on the user interface, that's very simple. We're just moving the item up 3 spaces, but in the background, there's a trickle down effect, and it affects, quite a few things. And at the end of the process, this is what the form is going to look like here. You see item at the top, and then also I gave it a custom application name as well. So now we're going to go ahead and open up Form Studio here. So I'm here in Agility Visual Form Studio, and I'm going to start by opening up my Agility Essentials project. So here in Agility Essentials, that is where our out-of-the-box sales order delivery form resides, or sales order picking form, rather. So here, I have a customer coming to me requesting, okay, I want this sales order picking form to be changed. I want the picker to select the item first and then have all the other information, kind of fall in line afterwards. So that means we're going to move that item field to the top and, fix the issues that come up from that resulting move. So first, before we can do any of this, we need to make a copy of this form because we're going to just start here. We want the standard things that are already going on in this form to stay. This gives us a really good starting point, and the customer, of course, wants this basic out-of-the-box application just with a few changes to it. So I'm going to go to copy form here, and I'm just going to name it TOM sales order picking for tailoring of the month, and hit OK. And then I'll just go ahead and open that. So now I have that TOM sales order picking form, but you'll notice here at the top, it still says sales order picking. I want to go ahead and change that so I can feel confident that I know I'm in the right application without making changes to the standard out of the box application. So I'm going to go over here to my form terms ID. That's what gives us the ability to translate this to other languages. That terms ID is set to sales order picking. Of course, we don't have a term in there that gets translated for TOM sales order picking. So I'm just going to cut out that terms ID there and click over here in the blank space under form description. And now we see our name change take place. So that's just something that you may want to do to make sure you know you're working in the right application. And then maybe whenever you're done, if you need that ability to be able to translate that form to other languages, then maybe you go ahead and put sales order picking back in there. All right, so now I have my TOM sales order picking. It's ready to go. I'm ready to start making changes. But first, I'm still in my Agility Essentials project. Now, I don't want to edit this form in here. Number one, I didn't want to edit the standard out of the box form because it would just get changed whenever I run the product updater. Same issue here, though. If I keep this in the Agility Essentials project, whenever I run the updater, it's going to be taken out of that project because it doesn't actually live there. So I need to move it to a custom project that I created. I would typically name that with the customer's name and call it, customer or tailored application, something of that nature. In this case, I created a custom project called Tailoring of the Month. So we're going to go ahead here and move it to another project. I'm going to scroll down and find Tailoring of the Month and hit OK. And now this should be moved. So if I go here to open project and open up Tailoring of the Month, now here is my TOM sales order picking form. So now I've created a copy of the original form so we can feel comfortable making changes. I move that to my own project so it's not going to get overridden when I run the updater, and I'm ready to go ahead and start plucking away and making this look the way the customer needs it to. So first, what we're talking about, at the cosmetic level is a very simple change. We want to move this item field from the third spot to the top spot. This is something customers often request. They'll see a form, they'll think about their process, and they'll say, okay, well, in our process, that's not the first place we start. We start somewhere else, and that information comes later. So in this case, the customer is saying to me, usually our pickers define the item they want to pick first, and then they, go ahead and look at the different pick lists and sales orders out there for that item. And, typically maybe they'll pick a couple different ones at the same time while they're standing there at that same item. So we want to move item to the first spot. I just highlight it here. So now it's my highlighted field. We can see over here too, text item is our current item. And then we're just going to press this arrow twice to move it up to the top. So now, again, at a cosmetic level, what we need to do here is done. Item is now first. As far as the customer is concerned, if they look at this, they would think this tailored application is done. It would look the way that they want it to look. But again, that doesn't mean that it's done. We actually still have a few more things to do here. So whenever we move item to the top, it causes a few issues because of the ordering. So typically, things would get set at the picking number level and at the order number level, and then that information would be used at the item level. Now, item is first, so information that we would typically use here is not currently set. Actions that we currently do here can't be done at this point in time because we don't have a picking number or an order number, those types of things. It causes quite a few issues. So the two main things that we're going to adjust on all three of these fields, and we shouldn't need to touch anything anywhere else because that stuff will still have the same information passed to it once we make sure these fields are, still pulling everything we need them to pull. It's going to affect two main things. It's going to affect the actions on the item, which is right here for all three items, the item field, picking number field, and order field. So it'll affect the actions. It'll also affect the lookup SQL as well. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start at the actions. We're going to talk a little bit about what's going on here. Then we're going to take care of the lookups and we'll return to the actions at the end. So first, when we look at these actions, there's quite a few that relate to that pick list or that sales order number that we need to go ahead and disable in here because they're no longer going to function the way that they're supposed to. So if we go down this list, we see right away these first two SQL events, they are referencing the pick list. So we can go ahead and turn those off. They are not going to work anymore because they are referencing that pick list. Then validate item, that'll still be fine. It's just checking to make sure that's a real item in SAP. So we can leave that. Pick list validate sales order item and sales order validate item are no longer going to work because we are simply defining the item. We have no way to know at this point if it is tied to a pick list or a sales order in the system. And lastly, once again, on this SQL event, we see pick list again. So we can go ahead and disable that. And then we have some formulas here. So with the formulas, if I go ahead and double click and see everything I'm working with, as far as bin, batch, serial, all of that stuff, we know that based on the item, right? So those things are going to be fine. We're not going to need to make adjustments to that. But text quantity remaining, I know I need to drill into because this field would typically be looking at what's the quantity remaining on a pick list and then for that sales order on the pick list. So if I go ahead and take a look here, once again, I see some different variables that are set feeding this information that we likely didn't set yet. So we'll probably have to come back and make this formula somewhere else later as well. So we'll come back to that. Now we turned off these actions that are going to be broken. And a key point, just like I referenced with that formula here, all of these actions still have to happen somewhere. At some point in time, they're going to have to happen, just not here on the item level. So we'll have to come back and make those changes later and, of course, add those different actions in at a point where they can actually be used. All right, so now I do want to go ahead and change my lookups first. So that's going to be the first thing I'm going to do here. So I turned off the actions that are broken. That way I know they're broken and we're going to have to go back and replace them. Now I'm going to go ahead and change the lookups for all three of these items because All these lookups aren't going to make sense now. That trickle down effect, once item is first, that means the picking number lookup is going to have to reference the item. Same thing for the order lookup. I'm going to start with my item lookup because originally we can see right here when we first look at it, it's looking at the order. So if I go ahead and drill into that by clicking the ellipses here, I can see when a customer is on that field and they click that ellipses on the handheld, the lookup is going to look at the order, which is obviously incorrect because we don't have an order at this stage. So this is going to need replaced with a new SQL query, simply just querying item information. So I have one typed out here. I'm just going to go ahead and paste it in. Very simple here. So I have my select statement. I'm just going to grab the item's code, the amount that are on orders. So we're aware that some of these items need picked because they are on sales orders, and then also the amount on hand so that we can look, and in the lookup we know not only are they on sales orders and need picked, I actually do have some of that item in the system that I can pick. Then I'm doing it from the item table, and I'm just looking to make sure that it is inventory items. So I'm going to go ahead and save that here. I'm going to change my return field again to be that item code. That just simply means if they use the lookup instead of scanning or typing something in and they select a field, it's going to pass that item code into the field on the screen. So I hit save here. I save my form, and just to show you what we've done so far, if I click on my item, now we see I have that item code, the amount on an order, and the amount on hand to pick. So we have a sense for, here with this item, we do have some that need picked for an order, and we do have items there to fulfill that, of course. All right. So now the item lookup is set. Now we need to go ahead and do our picking number lookup. So here, once again, this is going to be wrong now because originally this was kind of that situation that we just did for the item. There wasn't really any trickle down necessary. We knew what we needed, basically just very generic pick list information, right? Now it's not so generic because we need to look at that item before and filter based off of that item and only look at pick lists that are associated with that item. Now here my goal today is to show you guys how to do these tailorings with a video that's not going to make you take all day. This is, I'm talking fast and going through this fast because this is probably I don't know, probably 4 to 5 hours worth of my time figuring out how to do this beforehand, condensed into one video. So that's why I wrote the queries, ahead of time, and I'm trying to do this quickly. And I'm using this as a disclaimer because I'm not sure if all my queries are necessarily perfect. You can poke holes in my SQL. If you were actually delivering this to a customer, might be better ways to write the queries. I don't know. I just wanted to throw something together quickly so I can make this video and have it be efficient on time. So here I drop in my query. What I'm essentially trying to do here is I wanted to keep that pick list status as released or partial. So we kept that status that we had before, which was our filter, earlier on in the process. We can see right here. But then I add another filter there to make sure that there is an item on that pick list that goes with the item that we selected earlier. So if I save that here and go ahead and set my return field, it's just going to stay that abs entry. Hit save. Now again, instead of a query that just shows every single pick list that we have out there, here, I know a good item. I'm going to use this one here. Now we're going to see a limited query, a query that doesn't show every pick list I have because I have a lot of pick lists in my system. And here we only have a few because we know that item only has so many. Just to test that again too. This one should only have one, I believe. Yep, one pick list. So again, we changed that lookup because we need to filter based on the information before. So originally when pick list was the first piece of information, the trickle down meant that orders and items needed to be filtered as such, right? So when it was pick number, then order needed to be filtered by pick number. And then it was pick number, then order, then item item needed to be filtered by that pick number and that order number. So in this case, item was first. There's no filtering to that with a field on the form. Pick number was second. So, now we went in there, defined that pick number, and I didn't highlight, but we use this at text item that tells us that we're using that item field, that we defined here on the handheld application. So if you go up here to items, text item was the first item we have. So I just go ahead and throw that in there. That tells me, okay, look at the item the picker chose. We need to make sure that item's on the pick list. So now we're going to go ahead and do order. And of course, order is now going to need the filters for both item and the pick list because those two pieces of information precede it. So let's go ahead to our lookup here. And once again, I typed out a query in advance. So I'm just going to go ahead and take this query here. And I'm going to pop it in. All right. So again, very similar to before. I want this to be distinct. I don't want to have multiple rows of the same order. If that order has several rows of the item, I don't want to show that order multiple times. I did that same thing on the pick list stage as well because I didn't want a pick list that has 3 different orders with the same item, populating 3 times in my list. So distinct's my best friend here. Then once again, I filter based on status. Then I go look at my pick number. Okay, is this sales order on this picking ticket? Yes, it is. Then I go and look, okay, this sales order is on the right picking ticket, but does it have the item we already identified? So I add that in here as well. And again, both of these fields, text pick number, text item, we're just simply looking at the fields that we already passed information into on the handheld. So I'm going to go ahead and save. And we want our return field to stay doc number. And one more time here, if we go ahead and simulate, if we just go back to that item, then we go ahead to pick number here, then we can see the sales orders that have that item on it. So, in this case, you have multiple sales orders with that item, where there's probably cases where, you may only have one on the entire pick list. The pick list could have 50 sales orders. We're only going to show the ones that have the item we're looking for. So now everything user interface related is done. The item is moved where it is and the lookups look correct. So now truly the customer will not know, at a glance that this form is not complete. Everything that they see works, right? Everything that they see looks correct for how they want it to look. It meets their specs, but if they tried to actually pass information in here, we'd have some issues. So now we need to go ahead and start by fixing the problems that we're looking at. So first, I want to go ahead and add some validations to my item. So now that we know we're just looking at every item in the system, there's a couple constraints that we didn't need to consider before that now we need to consider. So a SQL event, and we'll go here advanced. And I'm actually going to post in my lookup from before because that generally has what I need, just to save myself a little bit of time here. Okay, and so we'll keep that to make sure it's an inventory item. I'm going to add another piece here. So I'm going to go and I'm going to do my, here, wait, first actually, I'm going to validate this because it's a headache the way it looks. All right, now it looks the way I like it to. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in my description because that is something we passed later that we are now not passing. So I want to make sure it's passed. We would typically pass the description here in these validations, but now I'm going to go ahead and make sure we're doing that at this point. So ITM item name, and we're going to automatically make that fill in the description on the form. That's how it worked before. It would be broken right now. So we just go ahead and put that in here. So it'll pass that item name as the text field item description. And then again, the other piece of this, I want to make sure that this item has this on-hand quantity first. I'm going to make sure there's physically some of this item in the warehouse. So that's the first step here, right? There's going to be a couple things we're going to validate before we let them move forward with the pick. So we're going to make sure, okay, can they physically pick this? Does this item exist? We don't want them to go into negative inventory if they found something or anything like that. So we're going to check, is it an inventory item? Yes, it is. Then we're going to check, okay, do we actually have some of this to pick? If that's yes, yes, we do. Then lastly, we're going to check, is there a reason to pick it? Is it on an order? If we select this item, are we actually going to see orders and pick list with it so that we can continue proceeding through the form? So we want to set it to on order quantity of greater than 0, on hand quantity greater than 0, and we want to make sure it's an inventory item. And then obviously here, there's a few constraints going on. So I'm going to just set my error message to be a little more generic in this case. I'm going to say item cannot be picked. And that's pretty generic, but that tells me either A, the item's not an inventory item, so it can't be picked. B, there is no inventory of the item, so it can't be picked. Or C, the item's not on a sales order, so it can't be picked because it won't be fulfilling anything. So I went generic with it there. Might not give them the best explanation in the world, but there's a couple different things at play, so we have to go generic. I'm going to save that here. And if we wanted specific error messages for each of those things, theoretically, what we could do is we could go ahead and split them up into 3 so that they would get an error for each individual one, right? So you would have a validation that would say, item's not an inventory item, or a validation that would say item doesn't have an on-hand quantity, or one that says item doesn't have a quantity on order. All right, so now I'm going to move it up to be right below my validate item. It'll now be the second transaction that happens right before any of these formulas. Now I'll save that. And let's go ahead and test it here. So first, if I look here, if I pick this item, there's no on order, no on hand, I should get an error. I did not get an error because I missed a key step. So that's important to note. We're figuring out these things in real time together, right? So if I select here, you'll notice I didn't feed in the selected item, so it's not even looking at anything. So this validation is completely redundant right now. It's not doing a single thing because what I need is I need to take that item code that I pass in after I select something from the list, and I need to make sure it is the same as this field. Now the validation works. Now we'll get our error. All right, so now if I go ahead and select that item with 0, item cannot be picked because there's no on hand. There's also no on order quantity. So now if I pick something with both, it works. It fills in my description, fills in my unit of measure. That's set on the validation. This is set in the validation we created. That information fills in automatically. We know it worked. One more time to make sure the errors. Here's one with on order but no on hand. Still kicks back. And let's do one with on hand but no on order. Kicks back as well. So that looks good. Now the item field is set. What needs to work in the item field works. It is a done deal, successful. Item field is good. Now we need to go down to our picking number field, and we need to make some adjustments to the actions here. So first, we're going to go ahead and make our own validation. So once again, like we just did, we need to make a validation to confirm that this pick list contains the specific item that we want, right? So first we're going to go ahead, go into our actions, and we're going to go to SQL event. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to take that lookup again, just like I did with the item. It's easy. You can post your lookup in here. Um, I just do copy and paste, put my lookup in here because it has the information I'm already looking for. Now in this case, what I'm looking to do is I am going to take off the statuses. We'll add another one in here for status later. We'll do another validation for that. But I'm simply just trying to look and make sure that this pick list contains the item that we're looking at. So I also want to make sure that I'm looking at the right pick list that I already selected, right? So I'm going to go here and copy my pick list abs entry. I don't want that distinct on there. So it's the same way we did it at the end, with our item validation. Whenever we had that error before when we tried to test it and it didn't do what it was supposed to do, it's because we didn't tell it, okay, look at the item that we selected. Same case here. We need to look at the pick list that we selected. So in this case, I'm just going to go to that text pick number here, hit save. And now what we see is we have a validation built that's basically going to look at the information that we entered, and it's going to say, okay, first off, what's the pick number that we selected? All right, it looks at that pick number, and then it's going to say, does it have the item that we selected earlier? And if it doesn't, we'll get an error message, and that's what we're going to define here. This one's going to be a little bit more specific than what we did before. So I'm going to abbreviate pick list with PL. We'll do does not contain item, and then if we go to advanced here, I'll actually pass in, well, not at the beginning, we want to pass it in at the end. I'll actually go ahead and pass in that item number so we know for a fact the pick list doesn't contain the item and we have that visual cue that we're looking at the right item. So save that. And then we're going to go ahead and move that up to the second action in our sequence here. So after our original validation here, now we're going to add in this validation to make sure, this makes sure it's a real pick list in the system, and then this makes sure that the pick list has the item. And then we do need to go ahead and add another validation to make sure the pick list is in those statuses that we defined before. We don't want them to be able to scan something and the pick list not be released or not be partially picked. So I'm going to just drop in once again my query here, and same thing, I'm going to keep that status. I'm just going to delete that, and I'm going to put my abs entry in there again to make sure that I am looking at the abs entry that we need. So now once again, same thing, except this time I'm looking at the pick list I selected. Is it released or picked? It has to be one or the other. Yes, it is. Great. If it's not, we get a validation error. And this time we're going to make that error pick list, and then we'll go ahead and put the number. Put it at the beginning again. Always click after. So pick list, number, whatever, is not open. Save that. And we actually probably want to look at the status of the pick list before we even worry about the items. So let's move that all the way up to number 2. So first, we're going to validate, is that a pick list in your SAP system? Then is it released or picked, or released or partially picked? And then lastly, we're going to look at is the item on there? So now I'm going to go ahead and close that. Let's go ahead and simulate and see if these are working. So there's a really easy way for me to test this here. We'll take this item, for instance. We know it's on order. It doesn't have any pick list. Just because it's on order doesn't mean it has a pick list. So let's go to my good test item here. We see all these pick lists here, right? So first off, I know that this item from querying before in my database was on pick list number 1. So if I go ahead and hit pick list number 1, even though the item's on it, it should fail because it's not open. So pick list 1 is not open. That works, right? Now if I do like pick list 5,000 and 50,000, let's just do that. That doesn't exist, so it should fail. Pick list not found. That was our first validation that we didn't create. And lastly, if I go ahead and pick a picking number that doesn't have this on it, so if I look at the list here, I know 415 doesn't have this item. It should say that the item's not on it. Oh, 415 is not open, so that's not good. Let's do 425. Pick list does not contain item A0001. So there we go. Perfect. Those two validations work. Now we know that we're validating on that pick list that, you know, A, it's in the statuses we need, and B, it contains that item. So lastly, now we're going to go work on the order here. Now the order is a little bit more complex because what we have to do is we have to look at the remaining things that happened on the item field that we disabled at the beginning and, you know, go ahead and bring those over to the order because now it's the last of those three. So anything that originally happened in the out of the box form that's no longer happening needs to now take place on the order field. So I can go ahead here and go to my actions and we're just going to go down the line. So first we'll click on this SQL event here and hit edit. All right, so this SQL event, pretty simple. It sets our pick entry number. So it's the lines pick entry number and it looks at the pick list, the doc entry, and the text item. So our doc entry is already set by a generic validation that's on the order. So if I go on the order here, this validation sets the doc entry, this validation checks and makes sure that that order is on that pick list. So we check and see if that order is on the pick list, then we check and see if that order actually exists in SAP. Great. Now we can add a new SQL event in here to, you know, set that pick list field, that pick entry field that we were setting before on the item. Now we're going to set that pick entry here on the order. And again, this has to be moved to the order field, not to the pick list field because it contains information that pertains to the order selected, the pick list selected, and the item. So if it needs all three pieces of information, it has to occur on the last field to do so, which in this case is now the order field because of how we moved item to the top. So now I'll just save that. There's no validation error here. We're not validating anything. We're just looking at those three fields and then setting a variable based on what's in those fields. So that pick entry variable needed set. We set it based on this data, hit save, and now that's third in our sequence. And it's going to stay third. We'll keep these two on the top, and then we'll add everything that we disabled on item afterward. So now we go ahead to our next SQL event here. And this is setting a quantity. So if I go into this here, there's a lot of different things at play, but what we're doing is we're setting the order line and the unallocated quantity. So there should be no error message because again, we're not validating to see if something actually exists. Yeah, this should work. So yeah, there's no error message here. We're just setting these fields, our unallocated quantity variable and our order line variable. So I'll save that and I'll go back down to order. And now we'll add a SQL event here. Oh, we have to click on advanced. Now we'll drop that in. Once again, we have to do this here because of the information requested, right? All right. All right. Perfect. Okay. Now we'll go ahead and do the two validations that it has. So if we go back up to item here, we did those SQL events that set some data. Now we see there's two validation transactions. So a couple things here. These are out of the box Wisys validation transactions. So if we open them up, everything's already walked out for us on what we need to do. We need to make sure though all this data is being passed correctly. We want to make sure everything's the same. We don't want to get into the weeds with this application. We want it to work the way it originally worked. So we just got to make sure we're still passing all the same data in all the same spots. So I'm going to take a picture for myself right now. So if you are following along at home, screenshot this or take a picture on your cell phone, just so you can make sure you copy these verbatim with what they're supposed to have. So you want a shot of what the inputs should be and then all the return data that you're setting as well. Nothing in that last field. All right, so this is BOS sales order pick list validate sales order item. So pick list validate sales order item is our validation. And then it does have a formula on it, so that means it doesn't happen every single time. So what we're looking to see is if it's not fully picked is going to be the formula on it. And if we edit that, we're looking at is our fully picked flag yes. If it's yes, then we can't do this one. So we make sure it's not yes. Then we make sure the unallocated quantity is also 0. All right, so that's all the information on this validation. So now I'll go ahead and set up that validation here. So I'm going to go back down to order. I'm going to go to validation transaction. And the validation we had, once again, is that sales order, validate sales order item. Pick list validate sales order item. That's what it is. All right. So now, if you look at those screenshots or pictures that we just took, our inputs are pick list entry, which is a variable, not a field, so it's not going to have an @ sign. Scroll down to pick list entry. Then doc entry here, another variable. And then this is just our item field. Then we jump over to our return data. Now you'll notice this does not look the same as it does on the other one. You're missing several fields. That's because it's just showing common fields. So we want to go ahead and change this box so it shows any return data we can pass. And we'll go down the list here. So PKL1 pick entry is going to be our, PKL1 pick entry, not abs entry. It's going to be our pick entry variable. PKL1 order line is going to be our order line variable. Inventory quantity remaining variable needs set as our released quantity. Inventory quantity remaining. Text item description as RDR1 item description. Okay. Warehouse code needs set to our warehouse variable. And then at the bottom here, we have some flags to set. So there's is serial and is batch need to have our batch and serial flag variables, and is bin needs to have our bin warehouse variable. All right. So now that transaction is set up, the validation is set up, it can validate, is this sales order item on this pick list, right? That's what we're trying to validate there. But then we got to go ahead and add a formula to it to make sure it's the same as before. So we'll hit new, and that formula was called if not fully picked. All right. And what we need here is our fully picked variable. So it's $ fully picked is what we're looking for. Right there, doesn't equal Y. So that's our first one. We make sure it is not fully picked. Then we want to make sure our unallocated quantity equals 0. So we'll find that unallocated quantity variable equals. And then in this case, we have a constant set up as 0 right here. All right, and we can save that. And now we have that formula and that logic applied to that validation. Now we're going to repeat the same process here for the other validation on the item. we want to make sure we carry that over as well. So this sales order validate item. So in this case, we're just passing the sales order information and the item information. And then here we have some info at the top, warehouse and description, and those flags later. So there's no pick list information in this case, which is because if we look and we see that our unallocated quantity is greater than 0, then we move away from the pick list and we focus on the sales order. All right. Cool. Now we'll go ahead and close that, go back to our order, and we will add that validation, not a SQL event. So here we go to sales order, and we go to sales order validate item. All right. So now, again, we're going to set this to be doc entry variable, just as we did last time, and this is going to be our item field. Then in our return data here, we need to set our description, warehouse, and some of this stuff may be redundant because it's been set before, like description, but there's no issue with setting it multiple times. You make sure that data is correct at the end after all the information is passed. So there's not an issue to making sure you set it a couple times to have that correct data there. And is binned is going to be binned. All right, I finished that, and I got to add a formula again. So this formula is called unallocated item. Unallocated item, I look at that variable for unallocated quantity, and again, I'm looking to see if it's higher than 0. We use that constant again for 0 and save that. So now both those validations are set up. We look at this first validation if it's not fully picked and the unallocated quantity is 0. And then we look at this second one if the unallocated quantity is greater than 0. All right. Now lastly, I have this formula that we talked about earlier. So I didn't turn these off because we want to dig through each of them. So first, these last 4 I don't think should be affected. Yeah, so if it's serialized, it's 1. This is hiding serial based on the flag. That's all just item related. This is binned, yeah. So this is just hiding fields based on the item. This is setting the serial field to 1 because if we're picking a serial, we're only going to pass a quantity of 1. But quantity of text quantity remaining should be affected here. So, all right. So we're going to change this one. We're going to delete it here, and we're going to replace it on that other field. So first, I'm going to take a picture of this. So it's set text quantity remaining. We're going to set that text quantity remaining field, and we're going to do an actual function, divide inventory quantity remaining by our unit of measure. Nothing happens there. Just make sure nothing else is happening on any of these. Yep. All right, we're good to go. I'm going to delete it here. So make sure you have your picture. Now it's gone. We only have the formulas that can actually function on the item level there. And we're going to go down here. We're going to add that formula last. New. All right, so we're going to call it set text quantity remaining. All right, and our parameter is going to simply be that text quantity remaining field. Or no, actually, we don't have a parameter in this case. There's no criteria. It's always true. So every single time this formula is going to run. So at the end of the order process, at the order field, this formula will run and do what we're telling it to do. So now what we want it to do is, if it is true, which it's always true because there's no criteria, we're going to go ahead and set that text quantity remaining field here to be our function. So we want our function to be divide, and our first field is going to be a variable called inventory quantity remaining right here. We're going to divide that by our inventory unit of measure factor, which is also a variable. All right, that looks good. That looks the same as my picture. So I'll save that, close, and I want to make sure there's no criteria for when that'll run. There isn't. Okay, there's no formula there. So now I move that down successfully. So now all of our actions and all of our validations are set. So if we go ahead, save this, and we run through order now, we'll test it the same way we tested item and pick list. So we'll go back to our original item, and we'll just go ahead to pick list here. So this has two orders, so we know if we select one of these, it should work. Does work. So now if we go back up here, let's go ahead and try an order that's not on here. So 412. And now if we look at the orders on here, we have 1007 and 1008. So let's go ahead and select order number 1000. Should get an error here. Pick list not found. So they cannot find a pick list with order number 1000 on it. Let's do order number 1010. Same issue, right? Pick list not found. It works. So we know our validations are working. We can't select an order that is not on this list. Let's just try one more time, right? Order 200 again, same issue. So our validations work. Everything works now. We can move through here. That does not need picked. Let's see if we can find something that needs picked. Well, it's just going to ask me if I'm okay with over picking, which for this case I am. So, so now I'm going to go ahead and just find a pick list that I can actually pick. So we'll go to our most recent one for this item. All right, we got 3 remaining. So let's go ahead and pass in a quantity of 2 and hit enter. And if we don't error out, we know the application is working, and then we are effectively done. So I hit enter here, it worked. So now we know that the form works. Of course, there would be some more testing involved to see if there's any issues in the background. But that's where I want to leave you guys today. I wanted to run through and show you how to generally do the tailorings. Of course, this video is going to be less than an hour long, and it's going to give you the gist of, how to rearrange a form, right? What it takes to, get from point A to point B. But, you're not seeing all the testing and troubleshooting that goes involved, that's involved at the beginning of this. That, adds several hours to the process. You're not seeing the testing that would happen after before you feel comfortable delivering this to the customer. We're just focusing simply on this video of what it should take to get to point A to get to point B from your original form. So just to reiterate what we did here, if I close out of my simulation, on the user interface, very easy. We take item from here. We used our arrows, right? And we just moved it up like this. Moved item to the first spot. That's all you do on the front-facing user interface there. Then we changed all of the lookups because of that trickle-down effect. So your first piece of information has a very general lookup. We're just looking to see items in the system that are inventory items. Then that trickles down to the corresponding lookups that it has now jumped ahead of, right? So since it's moved ahead of picking, number, and order, we need to, of course, go into picking, number, and order and change their lookups. So picking number needed to have a lookup that takes into account only pick lists with that item. Order needed to have a lookup that takes into account only pick lists that have orders that have that item on it. And then at the end, we need to make sure that we are changing our validations to number 1, validate that our order and our pick list have that item, but then also change the ordering to still, contain and process the same information that we were processing before on the item level. Most of that stuff had to be processed at the order level now because, it contained item, pick list, and order information. So now that order is last in the process, those things would happen at the order level. So I hope that all made sense to you guys. Those three main steps: changing the user interface, changing the lookups, and then adding in those validations to make sure we're validating against our first piece of information there. Thanks for watching.